Thor has dozens of hammers, but most people only know about 2 of them. Today, in this video, we're going to talk about the strongest, Omega-level hammers among these weapons. And I guarantee that after this video, you'll never look at Thor the same way again. Let's get started. 1. Mjolnir. Do you remember the scenes where we first saw Mjolnir in the MCU? Thor was a very arrogant, battle-hungry person back then. And then Odin placed a spell on the hammer to break Thor's pride. He said exactly this: whoever is able to lift this, shall be worthy of Thor's power. Thor was so arrogant that when he went to Earth and tried to lift Mjolnir again, he still thought he'd be able to lift it. And then that scene and atmosphere that's burned into all our memories happened. Thor, soaked in rain and covered in mud, desperately tried to lift the hammer. By the way, I always wonder, does it always have to rain during sad scenes? I mean, does it start raining the moment you go through something sad in your daily life? Even though this sometimes seems funny to me, I have to admit that this scene of Thor's was impressive. What do you think? Is it a boring cliche? Anyway, my friends, Mjolnir's story is deeper and more detailed in the comics. For example, in the comics we see that in Journey into Mystery number 83, 1962, Mjolnir was forged by blacksmiths from the heart of a dying star. I would have loved to see this scene in Thor's first film. And in the comics, this matter of worthiness is much more varied. For instance, Thor isn't the only one who has carried Mjolnir. Yes, we saw Captain America carry Mjolnir in the MCU too, but in the comics, far more characters carry Mjolnir. Do you think this is because there are more good-hearted characters in the comics, or do you think the MCU doesn't want to break the magic of the concept? For example, who in the Avengers lineup, besides Cap, do you think deserves to carry Mjolnir? And what happens if Thor loses this hammer? The answer to that is waiting for you later in this list. 2. Stormbreaker. Maybe the MCU didn't show us the scene of how Mjolnir was made, but at least we got to see Stormbreaker. In Infinity War, Thor lost Mjolnir. That scene shocked all of us. Hela destroyed Mjolnir with one hand, effortlessly. Yes, we were in shock at first, but I don't think it should have been that simple. I mean, Thor's mighty hammer shouldn't have been shattered that easily. This is exactly why Thor's 4th film got so much criticism. Once you hear the reason, you'll agree. Here's the thing, my friends, Asgard turning into a small village on Earth, Odin being so passive as a king, his only action in important moments being to go into the Odin sleep, Thor turning from a powerful character in the early films into a comic relief character over time, Asgard's vault holding dozens of powerful artifacts yet the realm still being destroyed so easily, a king like Odin being casually sent off to a nursing home by Loki, all of this gradually destroyed the image we had in our minds of a powerful Asgard and Asgardians. And the clearest example of that was Mjolnir being destroyed so easily with one hand. I think that moment was exactly the breaking point. Let me know in the comments if you agree with me. My friends, of course things don't end there after Mjolnir is destroyed. Thor goes to Nidavellir and gets help from Eitri. The scenario where Eitri loses his hands was very cleverly written. Because historically, ancient kings really did have the hands of a great architect cut off after commissioning a magnificent work, so that no one else could ever have such a masterpiece made. What was done to Eitri after he made Thanos' gauntlet was a cleverly written scene. Of course, I don't approve of it, but I have to admit it was a well-thought-out piece of storytelling. When Thor sees Eitri in this state, he encourages him, and together they forge a new weapon, Stormbreaker. The part where Thor draws energy from the stars, his courage, and his eyes flashing with lightning was incredible. And you know what I think was the best part? That Stormbreaker's handle was made from a piece of Groot. Many of you will already know this, so let me just say it. What we see here is not the real Stormbreaker. Because in the original comic stories, there is indeed a hammer called Stormbreaker, but it actually belongs to an alien hero named Beta Ray Bill. Beta Ray Bill's story is very deep, I won't get into it here, but there's a strong chance the MCU will show him to us in the future. How do I know? Because of the scene where they secretly hinted at him. The day I see Beta Ray Bill in the MCU, I'll probably cry. Also, do you think it was clever or unnecessary for the MCU to borrow Stormbreaker's name for a different object? Because Thor already has dozens of original hammers waiting in the wings. We'll keep talking about the best of them in a bit. 3. Jane Foster's Mjolnir. We talked about the shattered Mjolnir. So what happened to it? Of course, the MCU didn't forget about it, and brought in Jane's story from the comics. This Mjolnir is actually the broken version of the one we saw in our first, second, and third Thor films, but it does undergo a transformation. That's why we need to examine it as a separate entry. Why do I call it a different Mjolnir? Let's look at the foundation of the story first. While battling her illness, Jane goes near the shattered pieces of Mjolnir, and suddenly the pieces of the hammer start to move and come together. If you think Mjolnir reunites because it finds Jane worthy, you're mistaken. If that were the case, Thor could have reassembled the shattered Mjolnir himself. The reason this new Mjolnir comes together upon seeing Jane is that Thor had earlier told Mjolnir to protect Jane. So this new Mjolnir isn't in Thor's service, nor in the service of whoever is worthy, it's a hammer that serves Jane. Honestly, the comic version is written more deeply. In the comics too, while Jane battles her illness, she lifts Mjolnir, and each time she does, she gains Thor's powers, but unfortunately, this transformation harms her. She gets sicker with every transformation. Yes, you could say this is already in the MCU too, but the comics go into much more detail, my friends. Also, if you had to rate Thor's fourth film out of 10, what would you give it? Next up is my favorite hammer, let's keep going. By the way, don't forget to like the video. 4. Jarnbjorn. This hammer is honestly pure nostalgia to me, like a classic car. I don't know why the MCU doesn't use it and bring it into the universe, because when you think of Thor, this is the first hammer that should come to mind. It's an ancient Asgardian axe. This axe is much older than Mjolnir. And here's the important part, this axe is Thor's true friend, because Thor can use it even when he's not worthy of Mjolnir. What do I mean by that? Here's the story, my friends. When Thor becomes unable to lift Mjolnir, he turns to an old friend, Jarnbjorn, and this weapon lets Thor fight with it even while he's in his unworthy Thor state. In short, this weapon might look simple, but it's a lifesaver in the toughest of times. What do you think it looks like, visually? Be honest in the comments. Let's move to the next object, and the next one is a favorite among true comic book fans. 5. The real Stormbreaker. Now, in this section, we won't be talking about the MCU's Stormbreaker, because Beta Ray Bill deserves to be discussed on his own. And believe me, the real Stormbreaker's story is far wilder. My friends, this is a very old story. Here's how it begins. Beta Ray Bill doesn't look like a human. He belongs to an alien race with a horse-like head. And Beta Ray Bill is the last defender of his race. What's even more interesting is that Beta Ray Bill is able to lift Mjolnir. You know what that means, he's worthy. As you know, Odin can't help himself when he sees someone worthy, he immediately has a weapon forged for them. And the name of this new weapon becomes Stormbreaker. Why do you think the MCU still hasn't given us Beta Ray Bill? Our next hammer is a total classic. 6. Thunderstrike, Odin's second chance. I'll ask a simple, direct question. Can you be a hero like Thor without being Thor? I don't know how you'd answer that, but the only answer to this question is Eric Masterson. Maybe some of you don't know him. But let me explain briefly. He never appeared in the MCU at all. Starting in the early 1990s, we began seeing Eric in the comics, and for a short while, he actually becomes Thor. Just like I said earlier, since Odin gives a weapon to whoever proves worthy, of course he has a special mace forged for Eric too. Eric is so beloved in the comics that 3 years later, in 1993, he gets his own solo series. Of course, Eric Masterson doesn't end up being a boring copy of Thor. He builds a new career with his own identity, personality, and story. Grab your glasses for the next hammer, because it's very tiny. 7. Throg's mini hammer. We've all gotten used to Loki variants. Do you remember the first time we saw alligator Loki? So what could be Thor's most interesting variant? I'll answer that, a frog. Don't worry, it's not a signal glitch, this is real. The story behind it is an absolute legend, so listen closely. In Simonson's Thor series in the 1980s, an ordinary frog transforms into a tiny Asgardian warrior after a magical accident, and his name is very creative, it's exactly this, Throg. And yes, he has his own, tiny little hammer. Would you believe me if I told you the MCU actually showed him to us? During the period when Loki is taken by the TVA, for just a few seconds, we see Frog Thor in a jar. I nearly lost it during that scene. I wish the MCU would let classic Thor and Frog Thor meet. What do you think Thor would say in that encounter? No wait, here's an even better question. What do you think Tony Stark would say if he saw Frog Thor? Write the most creative comments you can think of. Let's have a little fun. We've talked about the best 8 hammers. In your opinion, is Mjolnir still the legendary one, or is it another hammer? If you want a part 2 of this series, write part 2 in the comments. And like the video. Subscribe.